Welcome to Aquarian Diary, where we discuss issues around the emerging age of Aquarius. I'm your host, John Irving. Thank you for joining me. Greetings all, it is March 10th, 2022. This is going to be a bit of a rant, and this rambles, so if you're not in the mood for that, you might want to not listen to this or listen to it at another time. I'm actually all over the map here, and I don't really have time to, just because of my limited time, I don't have time to go through and completely restructure and re-record all this. So consider it a bunch of streams of thought, and I apologize for that. Of course, like a lot of people, I have been paying a lot of attention to what's going on in Ukraine. In my own case, while I've been working, I have been listening to broadcasts and podcasts from around the world, probably for at least 6 or 8 hours a day for the past couple weeks, trying to get an understanding of what's happening there and why. Like most of us, I'm not an expert on Ukraine or Ukrainian history, or its involvement in the past with Russia and the former USSR. So I had to do quite a bit of brushing up on that. And one of the most notable things that has been going on with me for probably the past 4 or 5 days is this just real sense of anger and outrage about this whole situation and its implications. You know, on the bright side, the sanctions and all of the response from the international community, with a few exceptions, namely China and India, has been phenomenal. And Biden deserves, strong chills here, Biden deserves an incredible amount of credit for that. I think he has handled this whole situation just brilliantly. And he's got a lot of obviously very smart people behind the scenes who are helping play out this chess game, because that's what it is. You know, how do we deal with this tremendously difficult and complex situation without initiating World War III? You know, we can't go in there with boots on the ground. How do we make this whole experience terrible for Putin? And clearly that is playing out, as we're seeing almost every corporation now that is based in the West in some capacity is exiting the country. And this is going to have a devastating impact on Putin, his legacy, the country, and unfortunately the people of Russia. But what else can you do? We can't allow this kind of aggression to go unchecked. And so the response that has been deployed, like I said, is absolutely brilliant. I mentioned this in the last discussion I had with Irish Granny Tarot. I unfortunately said, I think it was around the 17-minute mark, I said Putin when I meant to say Biden, but if you listen to what I continued to say, it was obvious I meant to reference Biden. But yes, huge credit to Joe Biden. This is why him being such an experienced statesman, as opposed to a slimy politician, has proven to be incredibly valuable. Thank God Trump was not reelected. Can you imagine how much of a disaster all of this would be if he was president? Just unthinkable. So kudos there. And also to the other countries who have come in at full capacity to do everything they can, pretty much without actually getting involved in direct engagement, to make this a very painful experience for Vladimir Putin. And one of the benefits of this whole situation is that China is watching very closely what's happening, because, you know, we're all concerned about attempts on their part to invade Taiwan. And I'm sure they are second guessing doing so now that they are witnessing the potential repercussions of a global community coming together to put down Putinism. There's no question that the events in the past few weeks are world history changing events. Everything has changed in the matter of a few weeks, and it's just so remarkable that this occurred right when the USA Pluto return was exact. It cannot be overstated how significant recent events have been. History-changing, world-changing events. The implications and repercussions are incredibly profound and historic. Now, there's a few other things that I want to talk about, like this outrage and anger that I have been feeling recently. And I have been wanting to talk about this more now for quite some time, but I couldn't really get a grip or a handle on what the root of all this anger and outrage I'm feeling was. And until it just came to me today, actually. I literally sat with it for days because I didn't want to just come out and spew anger without knowing where it's coming from or why. And it became clear to me today what this is really all about. I almost jumped the gun and recorded this a couple days ago, and I'm glad I didn't, that I sat with it. This is extremely important. Of course, as I've mentioned before, I subscribe to a lot of readers and tarot card readers and, psychics and people, and however, I must be honest, I've been not listening to that stuff as much as I used to. Because over time, what's happened is that I've noticed that in some cases, there's people commenting on subjects that they are obviously not very well informed about. I'm not trying to judge or cast aspersions in some way, but, I found there were several occasions where I would be listening to something and then I would get to a point and I'm haven't really read up on this. You don't really understand this topic very well. And so why are you commenting on it? Just like anyone else. I mean, people who have an audience have a responsibility to be informed. So, like to give you an example, I'm not a climate scientist, but when I was actively involved in promoting information about climate change, I literally read thousands of reports. I'm talking, at one time I had a database, I think, of over 4,000 articles, and that was only a fraction of what I had actually read. And I would read from the beginning to the end. I would never share, and still don't, on any topic. I would never share links without actually reading the whole thing from start to finish, because I just don't think it's responsible, because, there could be something at 8/10 of the way through that is erroneous or false or misleading. And if I come across something that I feel doesn't sit right with me, I will go and read from other sources to verify, before I would share anything. So, knowledge and information is power, and there's a responsibility that comes along with that. I know a lot of people share things on social media without actually reading them. They'll just look at the headline and share it. I think that's irresponsible. I would never do that. There's been the odd, and I mean odd, like a few times out of many thousands where I did that. We have a responsibility to be informed. Sometimes I think it's just laziness. And then another thing that has come up a lot for me in the past number of days keeps coming to my mind is, if you've read George Orwell's 1984, which just about everyone should have, in my opinion, Oceania is at war with Eurasia, therefore Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia, I think is the quote. And so what's going on kind of has that vibe to it. I'm not suggesting that this whole situation has been contrived deliberately. That I don't think that's true at all. But there is an element of it where that does apply, and that part of it was clarified for me today. And it's this. Like, for example, this morning I listened to a Morning Joe episode, and they had on there the former head, a retired head of NATO. And my first thought was like, what the hell is a retired head of NATO doing hanging out on Morning Joe? Like, there's the possibility of a third world war. And why is this guy hanging out on Morning Joe? And nobody really asked that question, or nobody addressed that question. And the thing is that the military-industrial complex is having a field day with this because it justifies their existence, and it justifies increased investment into the military to fend off other such conflicts that might arise in the future. And I'm not saying that there's anything nefarious. I'm just saying it's kind of opportunistic for all of these military people to come out of the woodwork and be on the media talking about what's happening, analyzing it, and so forth, because there's this collective outrage about what's happening in Ukraine, which is justifiable. But what nobody is really asking or talking about is, what is the root cause of this? Why is this happening in the first place? I touched on that in the short episode I did on called The Tragedy of Ukraine when this first started. And the cause of this is that the international community has been effectively subsidizing Putin for years, despite all of his past transgressions and brutality. So we are karmically culpable for what's happening now because our corporations and our engagement with Russia and Putin has facilitated this whole situation indirectly by financing it. Like, why is the EU so dependent on Russian oil and gas? Like, how could you be so stupid, right? So obviously what happened is that there was somebody along the line who said, oh, there's a lot of money to be made here, so, we're going to opt for this scenario. Now, I can guarantee you 110% that there are people within the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies who for years have been warning politicians and high-level civil servants about the dangers of doing business with Putin and Russia. And they have probably been pounding their heads on their desks for the past few weeks as this whole situation has unfolded, this human tragedy, because it is a human tragedy, what's happening to those poor innocent people in Ukraine. It's just horrible, absolutely horrible. And we're all collectively outraged by that. But we are culpable because we effectively endorsed this through our economic and trade policies and have for years. Putin and his oligarchs are effectively organized criminals. They stole countless billions of dollars from the people of Russia, whom they control with an iron fist. So we effectively have been doing business with organized crime out in the open. All of these corporations, whether it's Shell or BP or Exxon, the banks, the fast food companies, and everybody has been trying to, profit, right? The motive was profit. Money. This is about money. Let's be clear. It's not about just territory, because if we had taken that money out of the equation, this would not be happening. Those people in Ukraine who are, whatever it is, 2 million or 2.2 million people who have been displaced now, that happened because of money. Period. It's that simple. The profit motive. Greed. And in the same way, as I've argued before, I did a whole video on this too, on USA and China. Same situation with China. Same thing. Now we have this authoritarian autocracy who, with nuclear weapons, who we do a crap load of trade with, and who supplies all kinds of critical materials and resources and products into our economies. Same exact situation. It's even worse with China because, they're a much more prosperous country than Russia, and they're smarter, right? They're not as dumb as Putin. That comes back to why we allowed this to happen. And I'm going to layer one more thing in here, which is that what's really driving this from our perspective as mere mortals living in this world, in this reality, is complacency. Because we sat back and allowed all this stuff to happen without expressing ourselves. If people had expressed outrage about that in the past, it would have diminished the likelihood of either of those scenarios unfolding. So that's where our collective kind of karma and responsibility comes into this. Over the years, I have actually had friendships and relationships that have been severed because of fundamental disagreements about social responsibility. There were people in my circle who felt that they had no responsibility to the rest of the world, and that if they just did their own thing and they were happy, everything would be okay. And I would say that's BS, because we are part of this global community. There are abuses of power, and people are suffering because of injustice and so forth. And if we don't take a stand and do something about it, we are culpable if we don't at least have a voice. So that's in who we elect and what kind of things we allow people to get away with and say. And, this whole war in the States, for example, about wokeism, which is really just people on the right being pissed off that they can't be ignorant, and I mean ignorant in a negative way, and express their repulsive views without any kind of consequence. And I say, tough shit. If you want to be an asshole, fine. But that doesn't mean that other people have to put up with it or want to listen to you or want to associate with you or whatever. So if you're going to be a jerk, go ahead. You have that freedom, but that doesn't mean that the rest of us have to like it or put up with it or not complain about it. It's that simple. Putin is being canceled by the whole world right now, as he should be. That's what's called for. There are plenty of people that I have experienced in the spiritual community who just feel like that they subscribe to this whole belief that I'm okay, you're okay. In other words, if I'm happy and healthy and everything's good with me, then the world is okay. And that's total crap. That's just BS, right? And this again gets back to what I was talking about earlier about being informed. We need to be informed. So as we are moving into the age of Aquarius, which is a form of global consciousness, we have a responsibility to be informed and engaged with what's going on in the world. There's a great deal of power within that, but there's also a great deal of responsibility. And so if we want that power, with the power comes responsibility. Very clear to me that this is true. I think many people erroneously think that the dark side is going to be obvious and in your face. But the truth is, just like in every other sphere of life, the really smart ones are not on the front pages of the newspaper, so to speak. They are working behind the scenes and subtly influencing people and situations in ways that most people cannot perceive. And I think it's also true because I have this sense that, as well as a literal war going on right now, and we're all aware of the incredible levels of polarization in the world, that's very obvious, but that there's also kind of a spiritual war going on this planet. And like I said, the more powerful beings on the dark side are going to be very insidious and more subtle, yet have more profound and far-reaching effects than the ones that are obvious. If you don't like the framing of it being a war against darkness, think about it being a war against ignorance and injustice. And even in the spiritual community, we have to be very cautious about this. Because, somebody could come across as being a very gentle, sweet, and nice, and alluring and attractive person. And 80% of what they say could make perfect sense, but there could be that small percent that is just designed to get people into complacency or fear, or for them to withdraw from fighting the good fight, so to speak. And we are at this threshold, which is what I'm arguing, where we have to put our foot down and say, enough is enough. We don't want to experience this anymore. Whereas the dark side will try and convince people that, as I've said before, oh, just worry about yourself and don't worry about all that other stuff. Don't pay attention to it. Whether it's disinformation or misinformation or just outright lies or sowing confusion, as Steve Bannon said, flood the zone with shit, or people buying into Russian PSYOP conspiracy theories. And that's exactly what has been going on. There's so much disinformation and misinformation out there that People get to the point where they can't tell the difference between what's real and what isn't, what's truth and what isn't. And this is why, wow, strong chills here. This is why we have to be very focused and concentrated on maintaining integrity so that we are not unwittingly contributing to all that fog of confusion and mistruth and untruths. Very important. Consider this. Complacency, as I've been arguing, is a way of endorsing the status quo. And as I've said, strong energy here too, we have the potential to change reality, to make all of these horrible things that have been happening stop happening. And the dark side would want us to disengage. That's like taking a combatant out of the field of play, effectively. And like I said, that can happen by just simply disengaging or falling under some spell of illusion or deceit. And this is a tactic that I think is being employed deliberately to undermine our potential to shift reality, because the more light that comes in here on Earth, the harder it will be for the dark side to exist and operate here, period. So if somebody is arguing that you don't need to be concerned about these gross human rights abuses that are occurring, these war crimes and crimes against humanity don't matter, that should be a warning sign that that source of information may be compromised. And some people are compromised without even knowing it, because they're so subtle. So we have to remain vigilant, is all I'm saying. I'm not necessarily saying that anyone is doing this deliberately, but it can be very easy to be manipulated in very subtle ways, energetically and so forth. And I'm not saying this is happening. I don't see this happening on a wide scale, but this thought has been coming up to me a lot recently as I have been watching what has been unfolding in the world and watching what some people have been saying. You know, like, for example, what's happening on Earth is dependent on alien beings who are manipulating our reality and our situation here as if it's beyond our control. Nothing is beyond our control, collectively speaking. That's why we're here. That's what we're here to learn. In the age of Aquarius, we have to own our power. And the destiny of this planet is completely within our control, collectively. You know, if somebody suggests that what's happening here is beyond humanity's control, or that it's being influenced or manipulated by forces or entities or beings from outside of Earth or from outside of our reality, and that all we need to do is sit back and enjoy the ride, I would question that very strongly, because, as I've said, this age that we're entering into is about humans being conscious of their ability to shape and control reality and what occurs here on this planet, and to take ownership and responsibility for that. So anybody who's suggesting that we do not have that responsibility, I believe, is not aligned with truth or higher wisdom or the actual intention for our species. We are incredibly powerful beings, and we can literally shape reality any way we want. We just have to learn how to focus our intentions and act on them, because we are here in three-dimensional reality, and action and intention have to be aligned. So anything that makes you feel or believe that you're inconsequential or that you don't have that power or authority is a lie. That is not truth. We are creators, and we can create whatever we want. So don't be misled, and don't be disempowered. That is not the truth. All we have to do is accept who and what we are, own our power, take responsibility, and act on it. We have to decide that we don't want reality to look like this anymore. And we can manifest our dream of a just and sane and uplifting world for everyone. There's two things. Like if you're channeling and you're bringing through high quality, high level information, that's one thing, assuming you're sure that your source is reliable and trustworthy. And then there's our own opinion, which is based on our knowledge and information and experience and what information we access and absorb. And so we do need to make sure that we're getting accurate information and that we have all of the information so that when we express our opinions, they are grounded in fact and reality and not distortions. Because there's an awful lot of that going on right now. This is this is part of the Aquarian Age. The Aquarian Age is about information and knowledge. And so we're seeing propaganda wars on all these different fronts. And the only way to win that war is to be completely grounded in reality and truth insofar as it's possible. And we rely on each other, those of us who resonate and are grounded with that truth and who are vigilant. We can't be lazy when it comes to intellectual matters. That's essentially one of my main points. So another argument I'm going to make is that the people on the far right really are motivated by malice, essentially, or greed, or narcissism, or whatever it is. The people who really are the problem are the people in the squishy middle. Like, I don't understand how somebody could swing to, say, to use politics in the United States as an example. How could you be liberal and vote Republican? It just doesn't make sense, right? Again, my point is that the people who aren't engaged and feel that they don't have any kind of social responsibility to be informed and aware are really the problem. I just don't see how we move into the age of Aquarius and into this Aquarian energy, which I've argued, like if you listen to my Pluto and Aquarius episode, that requires that requires awareness. That means that we can't just see none of this kind of, what I'm arguing is that none of this kind of crap would be happening if people were engaged. And I think that is the bigger lesson in all of this is that, we can't just say, oh, this politician's just going to deal with this problem and I can just go about my life and not worry about it. That's just nonsense. And also why I feel that people who focus so much attention on individual figures within politics are kind of missing the picture, and that is the old paradigm where, somebody or something is just going to magically come along and solve all the world's problems. Total BS. That's not what this is about. That is Piscean age thinking. Those people who believe that are stuck in that paradigm. That is the whole theme of the age of Aquarius and Pluto moving into Aquarius, which is happening in the next couple of years. I think about how, for example, people talk about all of these high profile figures and how they're all reincarnations of other high profile figures in other lifetimes. And I often think, well, how is that possible? The rest of us are just plebes. We don't matter. We're not important. That all of this influence and power is in the hands of a few souls. I don't like it. That just bugs me. This notion that anybody who's in a position of power or authority or influence has been in all these previous lives. They were all celebrities and, influential people. And I'm like, no, we all have that potential to change the world. That's one of the lies of the Piscean Age. It's a Piscean Age paradigm, this belief that power rests outside of us in the hands of somebody else, and our fate is dependent on their actions or inactions. This weird kind of celebrification and deification and worship of other people, which I've expressed my opinions on before, but it's just kind of weird. To me, it speaks of weakness and lack of self-confidence and lack of control, or the fear of not being in control. So what I'm suggesting is that we have to take a stand. You think of someone like Greta Thunberg, like just amazing. She just, strong chills here. She mobilized a global community of people, young people who are the most important, really, because she just said, no, this is ridiculous. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. It takes a lot of guts to do that. And so what I'm arguing now, at this point in this discourse, is that we can no longer accept complacency. So people who are just disengaged and not paying attention, the ones in the middle are the ones that are the problem. And that until we collectively, or at least some significant critical mass of people, are actually engaged, nothing is going to change. We're just going to keep repeating these scenarios. This whole thing in Ukraine now, one of the things that was really upsetting to me about it is that it has a very much a 20th century vibe. It's almost like we went back to 1949 or something like that. And that is very disconcerting because it feels like we're going back, And what I'm saying is that until we break this pattern of complacency, which means, like I said, being aware and not allowing our corporations and our governments to engage with dictators and tyrants and criminals, nothing is going to change. We have to put our foot down. Even surprisingly, I was on the project I'm working with, I had to source a product, and he said, I don't want anything from Russia. And I'm just like, wow, that's cool. I wasn't expecting that from that person. Small thing. It's a small thing, but he's taking a stand, and he's willing to pay more for something that isn't sourced from Russia. And that was uplifting. The uplifting part, like I said before, is that the world is united and coming together. But like I said, hardly anyone is talking about really the root causes of all of this. And I read stuff. I don't just read American press, please. Right? If you're in America, don't just read American press. I read stuff from Canada, Europe, America, Asia, Australia. I read stuff from or listen to stuff from all over the world, because you can only get a really accurate perspective when you do that, because there's always people with their own sort of like unique MSNBC type spin on things. You will not get an accurate representation of reality if you just source all your information from one source. And then, there's another thing too on this same thing. I actually ended up watching a video today by a noteworthy climate scientist who was explaining the physics and math behind, how we calculate radiative forcing, or how much the Earth is going to warm given how much CO2 we have put into the atmosphere, who was arguing that we've already blown past the 1.5 C limit, and there's no way we're not going to do that. We're probably going to be at least at 2 under any scenario. And that video was viewed less than many of my videos. And I'm like, how is that possible? We're talking about something on a scale that is so dramatic and has such profound implications, and hardly anybody, and I mean literally hardly anybody, is paying attention to this kind of stuff. People pay attention to politics and politicians and and, the daily news. But the really critical stuff, hardly anyone is paying attention to. I find it drives me crazy. There's this really weird phenomenon where people with a lot of expertise, knowledge, and critical information seem to be voices in the wilderness. And I have witnessed this for many years. A lot of the people who, for example, were desperately trying to draw the world's attention to the profound threat of human-caused climate disruption were not heard or listened to. And I've seen that repeated over and over and over. And for those who are in those positions, it can be incredibly frustrating and scary and depressing. And that whole phenomenon, why that occurs, really needs to be understood. It's almost as if they are viewing our reality from another paradigm or perspective, and the paradigm that needs to be altered is impervious to that knowledge or wisdom or truth. Very strange. One of the things I'll mention is that while of course, I had to do all this research and reading about what was going on in Ukraine because I like to be informed. And I reached a point where I got extremely anxious. And so I did some of my deeper, more powerful, energetic hygiene techniques. And then I noticed a remarkable shift. So on a global level, there is kind of a little bit of hysteria going on. And to maintain your objectivity, you need to disconnect from that periodically. So I'm suggesting this to people I'm not saying to be disengaged. I'm just saying to make sure that you don't get swept up into those energetic currents of mass consciousness that are in a state of fear and hysteria and paranoia about what's going on in the world. We can do both, right? We can be aware and we can also remain objective. Like I said, the people who are the problems are the ones who are sitting on the fence. It's not the people who are engaged. It's those who aren't. In a sense, people who are complacent or sitting on the sidelines are kind of like people who refuse to wear masks during the pandemic. It's such a small, minor inconvenience for the benefit and safety and well-being of others. And it's a very peculiar mindset that these people have, at least from the perspective of most of us. And as I said, I think that people who are sitting on the sidelines as history unfolds are akin to anti-maskers. So yeah, I think we have to start applying pressure to people who are complacent. That's what I'm suggesting. Like if you know people who just don't give a damn, just tell them that's not good enough. That's no longer acceptable. It's no longer acceptable to be sitting on the fence and to not give a crap, whether it's due to laziness or narcissism or whatever it is. We have to raise the bar and not be afraid to do so. It's time to wake up. It's time for those people who are still sort of dozing to wake up, and that's the people in the middle. That large chunk of society that will tip the balance in the favor of truth, justice, and integrity. And we need to call out people who, like I said, are sitting on the fence. We need to start challenging them to wake up, to be engaged, because we need them to win this battle, this war. Obviously, some people cannot be engaged because of life circumstances, family commitments, work commitments, and so forth. And that's fine. We can't all be at the front lines of this. But what you can do is you can make an effort to support people who are doing that work. Quality journalists who I think have been under attack for years now, the truth tellers and truth speakers. You can not follow people who are promoting misinformation and disinformation. You can encourage people that you care about to be engaged and to be aware and to be conscientious. And like I said, most importantly, not follow people who are promoting misleading or false information or information which is designed to disempower or undermine us. And we can take breaks when we need to and do our clearing and energetic hygiene and support others when they're in downtimes, because this can be exhausting. If you're empathic, there's a lot of trauma and hysteria in the world right now. And so we need to remain grounded and centered and balanced so that we can be vigilant and alert and engaged. Actually, I've received quite a few questions from people in comments, and I'm going to get to those, but I'm going to do that separately. So there were some really good questions. Like I said before, I get some of my subscribers are really amazing and very tuned in, and they've prompted me to address things that are actually really significant and great questions. I'm really looking forward to doing that, but I needed to get this off my chest, and this was the opportunity to do that. Anyway, I hope this makes sense and resonates. It's true that as we move into this age of Aquarius, we need to take responsibility for not only our own reality, but the reality of the whole planet Earth. That's what this is about. And I believe in the future that everyone will be expected to be informed and engaged. That's what has to happen. That's what separates the age of Pisces from the age of Aquarius. So I think that's everything I want to say. This is not scripted. Most of this was recorded on March 10th, and I'm adding a little bit here today on March 12th. Funny, just as I thought I was done recording this at the very last minute, this song, No Time Left for You, by the Guess Who from the 1960s, mysteriously came to my mind. I swear, I never think about that. And again, I am tweeting some of what I am reading at my nascent Twitter handle, Aquarian_diary. All right, take care, and I will talk to you soon.